You keep wondering why love feels so unstable, why even the people closest to you trigger fear, jealousy, or silence inside your body. It's not because you're broken, it's because your inner child is still living by old family laws that once kept you safe. Those hidden laws are not mistakes. They are survival codes your nervous system wrote when love was inconsistent, when safety was fragile, when trust could not be guaranteed. 7 laws of healing the inner child. The principles that free you from anxious attachment, family patterns, and emotional cycles you didn't choose, but have been repeating all along. There is a reason why every attempt at healing, every book you've read, and every practice you've tried, sometimes feels like it bounces off the surface instead of reaching the core. Without safety, nothing takes root. The first law of inner child healing is not about joy, not about forgiveness, not even about love. It is about safety. When you were young, your body wrote the first commandments of survival, and they sounded like this: stay small and you'll be safe. Stay quiet and you'll be safe. Don't need too much and you'll be safe. These laws weren't written on paper. They were etched into your nervous system, and the child inside you believed them as if they were sacred truth. Safety is not just the absence of harm. For a child, safety means a steady rhythm of love, someone who is there when they cry, someone who stays when storms rise, someone who teaches them that closeness is not a trap but a shelter. If you didn't have that, your nervous system learned to live in hyper-alert. Even today, you may find yourself scanning a room for danger, tensing when someone comes too close, or pulling away the moment intimacy deepens. To others, it may look like anxiety, defensiveness, or overthinking, but beneath those behaviors is one ancient wound: the loss of safety. Until that wound is addressed, every attempt at growth feels like planting flowers in sand. Think about how your life looks when safety is missing. You may crave love but sabotage it the moment it arrives. You may long for rest but feel restless whenever you slow down. You may achieve success but feel it slip through your hands because your body whispers, "Don't relax, it won't last." This is the invisible cost of a childhood without consistent safety. It is not your fault, it is your system's memory. Safety was not just absent, it was replaced with unpredictability. And unpredictability writes a harsher law than pain itself, because it convinces you that love cannot be trusted, that peace is a trap, and that one wrong move means the loss of everything you hold dear. The law of safety teaches us something paradoxical. Healing cannot be forced by willpower, because the part of you that still feels unsafe does not speak the language of logic. It speaks the language of the body. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your stomach knots. These are not flaws, they are messages. The forgotten child is telling you, "I am not sure we are safe yet." And unless you learn to answer that message, to create safety from the inside out, you will keep reliving the same old cycles. This is why affirmations sometimes feel empty, why self-love practices feel hollow, because without safety, the soil is too hard for the seed to grow. So what does it mean to create safety now as an adult? It begins with noticing the ways your body reacts and honoring them instead of shaming them. When you feel tension rise in your chest, instead of calling yourself too sensitive, you pause and say, "Of course I feel this way. My body is remembering." When you catch yourself pulling back from someone who loves you, you do not force closeness. You ask what your inner child needs to feel safe again. Sometimes it is space. Sometimes it is reassurance. Sometimes it is just your own presence, a hand on your heart, a breath that says, "I am here, I won't abandon you." Creating safety also means redefining what you allow. You may have tolerated chaos for so long that peace feels unfamiliar, even frightening. But the law of safety invites you to choose differently. To choose relationships where your nervous system can rest instead of react. To choose environments that nourish you instead of drain you. To choose words toward yourself that soothe instead of punish. Healing begins not with grand transformations, but with these small acts of reteaching your body. We are not in danger anymore. Each time you choose calm over chaos, reassurance over criticism, presence over abandonment, the child inside you begins to believe it. And here lies the hidden truth. You cannot truly feel joy, intimacy, or wholeness until safety is restored. Safety is the ground beneath the house. Without it, Every wall leans, every roof cracks, every room feels unstable. But once safety is in place, the house of your being can finally hold love, playfulness, and trust without collapsing. That is why this first law matters more than any other. Because until the child within you feels safe, they will not allow you to heal, not because they want to punish you, but because they are still trying to protect you. And when you finally show them that it is safe now, that the storm has passed, they will step forward not as a wounded child, but as the guardian of the joy you thought was lost. Recognition is the second law of healing, and it is more radical than it first appears. Safety gives you the ground to stand on, but recognition gives you eyes to see what has always been there. When you grow up carrying wounds, you often mistake them for your nature. You say, "I am anxious, I am needy, I am broken." But these are not your essence. They are reflections of what was never seen, never named, never validated. The child inside you once cried out, "See me, hear me, notice me," and if that call was met with silence, punishment, or dismissal, the longing for recognition grew into a lifetime of self-doubt. Recognition is not about pity, it is about truth. It is about finally telling yourself, what I went through mattered, what I felt was real, what I needed was valid. Think of how much pain comes from the absence of recognition. Imagine a child drawing a picture, bringing it proudly to their parent, only to be ignored or told it's not good enough. The child does not stop creating, they stop believing their creations matter. In the same way, when your tears were unseen, you did not stop feeling. You stopped trusting that your feelings had value. Recognition is the medicine that begins to reverse this. When you allow yourself to say, "Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was neglected. Yes, I needed more than I received," you are not wallowing. You are finally correcting the distortion that told you your needs were too much, your voice unimportant, your existence inconvenient. The law of recognition asks you to shift your gaze inward with gentleness but also with precision. It is not enough to know in theory that you had a hard childhood. You must recognize the specific ways it shaped you. Do you overachieve because you once had to earn love through performance? Do you silence your needs because you were taught they were a burden? Do you chase emotionally unavailable partners because they remind you of the parent who never fully chose you? Each recognition is a key turning in a lock, and with each lock that opens, a little more energy returns to you. The truth does not harm, denial does. Recognition also requires you to stop gaslighting yourself. So many survivors of trauma whisper lines like, "It wasn't that bad, others had it worse. I should be over this by now." These words are not humility, they are remnants of the very invalidation you grew up with. When you minimize your pain, you repeat the same abandonment your caregivers enacted. Recognition interrupts that cycle. It says, "I no longer minimize. I no longer dismiss. I no longer tell myself my pain was imaginary." Instead, you dare to call things by their true names. Loneliness was loneliness, neglect was neglect, fear was fear, and your response to them was not weakness but survival. Imagine how your life shifts when recognition enters. Suddenly, the weight you carried in silence begins to feel lighter. You may remember scenes from childhood, and for the first time, instead of blaming yourself, you feel compassion. You look at the child you once were and say, "Of course you cried, of course you longed, of course you protected yourself the only way you knew how." This recognition is like turning on a light in a room you thought was haunted. What looked terrifying in the dark reveals itself to be the outline of old furniture. The ghost was never real, it was the absence of clarity that made it seem so. The beauty of recognition is that it does not stay confined to memory. Once you practice it with your past, it begins to color your present. You start to recognize patterns in your daily life not as flaws, but as echoes. You notice when you shrink in a meeting at work and realize, "This is my child self, afraid of being punished for speaking." You notice when you panic at a delayed text and realize, "This is the echo of abandonment, not the truth of this moment." Recognition transforms your triggers into teachers. Every reaction becomes an invitation, not to judge yourself, but to understand yourself. And the more you understand, the less power those old patterns hold. At its core, recognition is love disguised as truth-telling. It is the moment when you stop demanding perfection from yourself and start granting understanding. It is when you look at your reflection and instead of saying, "Why am I like this?" you whisper, "I know why I am like this, and I will no longer pretend I don't." This simple act of recognition is revolutionary, because it restores to you the dignity that neglect and shame once stole. It tells your inner child, "You are no longer invisible. I see you, I honor you, I believe you." And for a child who once longed only for recognition, that is where healing truly begins. The law of permission is where many people hesitate, because it requires you to do the very thing you once swore never to do again. To need, to feel, to want. As a child, your nervous system learned that your needs were either too much or too inconvenient. Maybe you were told to stop crying, to toughen up, to be quiet. Maybe your requests for affection were met with impatience, or your excitement with ridicule. Over time, you internalized the message that needing was dangerous, and so you learned to live without permission. You denied yourself the right to feel sadness, to show anger, to crave comfort. Healing requires undoing this vow. Permission is the act of telling yourself, "I am allowed to feel, I am allowed to want, I am allowed to take up space." Without this, all other steps in healing remain incomplete. Consider how many ways the absence of permission shows up in adult life. You overwork, not because you love exhaustion, but because resting feels forbidden. You swallow your truth in relationships, not because you lack honesty, but because speaking up once cost you love. You numb your body with distractions, not because you lack depth, but because presence felt unsafe. The law of permission asks you to notice these patterns and to name them for what they are: survival, not identity. To heal, you must begin granting yourself what no one else once gave you. You must extend to yourself the permission to live as a whole being, not as a ghost of who you were forced to become. This law is not about indulgence. It is about restoration. Giving yourself permission to rest is not laziness. It is medicine for a body that has lived too long in survival mode. Giving yourself permission to love is not recklessness. It is reclaiming what shame once stole. Giving yourself permission to feel anger is not destruction. It is honoring the fire that once had to be hidden to keep the peace. Permission is the process of returning to yourself piece by piece, until every feeling, every need, every truth has a place at the table. When you stop exiling parts of yourself, you stop living as a fractured being. You begin to sense the fullness of who you are, and with that fullness comes wholeness. Imagine what it feels like to live without permission. A person who denies themselves permission to grieve will never feel the depth of release. They will carry sorrow as silent weight. A person who denies themselves permission to be loved will sabotage every relationship because intimacy feels undeserved. A person who denies themselves permission to desire will live a muted life, never stepping into the creativity, passion, and power that is already inside them. Now imagine the opposite, granting yourself permission. Tears flow and lighten your chest. A hug lands and feels safe, not suspicious. A creative idea bursts, and you allow yourself to follow it rather than dismiss it. This is the transformation the law of permission brings. It may sound simple, but permission is one of the most difficult practices because it confronts shame directly. Shame whispers, "You don't deserve this. Who are you to rest, to speak, to feel?" Permission answers, "I deserve this because I exist. My worth is not negotiable. My needs are not crimes." Each time you grant yourself permission, you rewrite the script shame handed you. Each time you breathe into a feeling instead of numbing it, you prove to your nervous system that presence is safe. Over time, these small permissions accumulate until they form a new reality, one where you no longer need to hide from yourself. Think of a child finally being told, "Yes, you can cry. Yes, you can dream. Yes, you can be loud. Yes, you can be exactly who you are." The relief that floods their face, the softening in their body, the spark in their eyes, this is the same relief your inner child feels each time you practice permission today. You cannot change the past, but you can change the story you tell yourself now. And when you do, the child who once silenced themselves learns to speak again. The one who once hid learns to step forward. The one who once begged for scraps learns to receive love without apology. Ultimately, the law of permission is about trust. To give yourself permission is to trust that you are resilient enough to feel without being destroyed, worthy enough to want without being shamed, human enough to rest without needing to justify it. Without permission, healing remains an idea. With permission, healing becomes embodied reality. When you grant yourself this law, you tell the world and your own soul that you are no longer bound by the silence of the past. You are free to live, to love, to feel, to exist. Every human being carries within them an invisible script about love, and this script is written long before they understand what love even means. As a child, you didn't analyze attachment styles, you simply adapted. If your caregivers were warm and consistent, you learned that closeness was safe. If they were unpredictable, absent, or critical, your nervous system drew a different conclusion. That love is fragile, inconsistent, or even dangerous. This early script becomes the lens through which you view every bond in adulthood. It doesn't matter how intelligent or self-aware you are. When intimacy touches the nervous system, it obeys the old laws. This is why you may feel confused, asking yourself, why do I always fall for the same kind of people? Why do I panic when they pull away? Why do I go numb when someone gets too close? These are not random choices. They are attachment patterns still alive within you. Attachment patterns shape not just your relationships, but your entire sense of self. If you learned that love had to be earned, you may have become the overgiver, the one who bends, appeases, sacrifices, and keeps quiet to avoid rejection. If you learned that closeness was unpredictable, you may have become the anxious one, constantly reading between the lines, decoding silence as threat, overthinking every pause. If you learned that expressing needs led to rejection, you may have become the avoidant one, building walls, convincing yourself you don't need anyone, hiding behind self-sufficiency. Each pattern was once brilliant survival. But as an adult, these same patterns can feel like chains. They keep you repeating relationships that mirror the very environment you once escaped, mistaking the familiar for safe even when it hurts. This law reveals something most people miss. Attachment patterns are not just about romance. They echo in every bond. At work, they decide whether you speak up or stay silent, whether you trust your voice or wait for approval. In friendships, they dictate whether you reach out or withdraw, whether you allow closeness or keep people at a distance. Even in spirituality, attachment patterns appear. You may unconsciously recreate the same dynamics with mentors, communities, or even with your vision of the divine. The nervous system does not separate contexts. It repeats what it knows until something interrupts it. That something is awareness. The law of attachment patterns insists that the first step toward healing is recognizing the script you're living and daring to see that it was written long ago. The hardest part of this recognition is the paradox. You are both loyal to the pattern and exhausted by it. A part of you knows it hurts to chase unavailable people, yet another part feels magnetic pull toward them. A part of you knows it is lonely to hide behind walls, yet another part panics when someone tries to get too close. This contradiction is not insanity, it is the nervous system's way of trying to resolve the old wound. It seeks out familiar dynamics, hoping this time the story will end differently. But it rarely does, until you bring consciousness to the vow beneath the pattern. If I can fix them, maybe I'll prove I'm worthy. Or, if I stay distant, maybe I won't be hurt. The cycle continues. This is why awareness is not optional. It is the key that begins to unlock the loop. Healing attachment patterns requires more than simply understanding them. You cannot just read about anxious or avoidant attachment and expect change. You must engage your body, because the nervous system is where these patterns live. When you allow yourself to feel the panic rise and stay present without abandoning yourself, you begin to rewire. When you notice the impulse to withdraw and instead speak one small truth, you begin to rewire. When you let yourself be held without apologizing, you begin to rewire. Every moment of awareness and choice becomes a stitch in a new script. Over time, these stitches form a new fabric, one where closeness feels safer, where needs are allowed, where love no longer equals danger. The law of attachment patterns also teaches humility. These patterns do not dissolve overnight. You may recognize them, vow to change, and still find yourself repeating them. That is not failure, it is the nervous system practicing. Imagine a child learning to walk. They fall 1,000 times, not because they are weak, but because balance takes time. In the same way, each time you notice the pattern, pause and choose differently. You strengthen a new pathway. This is not about perfection, it is about persistence. Healing attachment is not a single breakthrough, but a slow return to safety practiced moment by moment. And here lies the connection to a wound you may already recognize: anxious attachment. In another video, the real reason you have anxious attachment, inner child healing, I go deeper into how inconsistent love wires the nervous system to confuse closeness with danger. If what I've described here resonates, that teaching will help you see why panic rises when someone pulls away, and why silence feels unbearable. You'll find the link in the description below. Think of it as the next chamber in the labyrinth, where this exploration continues. What you exile does not disappear. It waits. The law of shadow integration reveals that everything you bury, every forbidden feeling, every silenced need, every moment of shame remains alive in the dark corners of your psyche. When you were small, you may have learned that certain emotions were unacceptable. Maybe anger brought punishment, so you swallowed it. Maybe sadness brought rejection, so you masked it with a smile. Maybe vulnerability brought abandonment, so you built armor. These choices were not conscious, they were survival. But the parts you hid away never died. They became your shadow. And the shadow, left unseen, does not stay quiet. It leaks out in unexpected ways, in the intensity of your triggers, in the sabotage of your goals, in the relationships you cannot sustain. What you push down, life brings back, until you are ready to face it. Shadow work is not about hunting darkness, but about recognizing the gold buried inside it. Every trait you reject in yourself is often a distorted form of something essential. Anger, when hidden, erupts in destructive ways. But at its core, anger is the energy of boundaries, the fire that says no when something violates you. Sadness, when denied, turns into numbness. But at its root, sadness is the tender recognition of what you valued, a testament to your capacity to love deeply. Even shame, when unexamined, becomes a prison. But when faced, it reveals the longing underneath, the desire to be seen, to be accepted as you are. The law of shadow integration insists that healing requires turning toward what you once abandoned, not to destroy it, but to reclaim the gift it holds. This law shows up vividly in relationships. Perhaps you attract partners who embody the very qualities you suppress in yourself. If you hide your anger, you may find yourself with someone who rages uncontrollably, carrying the energy you disowned. If you silence your needs, you may magnetize people who demand endlessly, forcing you to confront what you denied. If you fear vulnerability, you may fall for someone who exposes their fragility, making you uncomfortable because it reflects your own. These are not coincidences, they are mirrors. Life brings your shadow to you in human form, inviting you to integrate what you could not carry alone. Until you recognize this pattern, you may think you are unlucky in love, but the truth is, your soul is arranging encounters with your own forgotten self. The shadow also speaks through your body. Anxiety may not just be chemical imbalance, but the echo of emotions never allowed expression. Chronic fatigue may not just be exhaustion, but the weight of carrying a self that is only half alive. Even physical pain often corresponds to unprocessed feelings. A tight chest that holds back grief, a clenched jaw that hides words unspoken, a heavy back that carries responsibilities never meant for you. Shadow integration means listening to these signals, seeing symptoms not only as problems but as metaphors. Your body remembers what your mind denies. When you invite curiosity instead of judgment, your body becomes a map, showing you exactly where your shadow waits. What makes this law difficult is fear. To open the door to the shadow feels like inviting chaos. You may worry, if I face my rage, will it consume me? If I allow my grief, will I drown? If I look at my shame, will I collapse? But integration is not about unleashing destruction. It is about creating a container strong enough to hold what once overwhelmed you. Imagine sitting with your inner child who was once told, "Don't cry," or "Don't feel." Now, as an adult, you have the capacity to sit beside them and say, "It's safe now. Show me everything." The shadow becomes dangerous only when ignored. Faced with compassion, it transforms into power, tenderness, and truth. Integration is the bridge from fragmentation to wholeness. For years, you may have believed that healing meant becoming only positive, only light. But wholeness is not about erasing the dark. It is about holding both, the grief and the joy, the anger and the peace, the shame and the dignity. This is why shadow work feels like alchemy. It takes what once seemed poisonous and reveals the medicine hidden within it. By reclaiming the disowned parts, you no longer fight yourself. You stop projecting your wounds onto others. You stop living half a life. You step into the paradoxical freedom of being fully human. The law of shadow integration whispers a final truth. What you fear most about yourself is often the key to your liberation. The vulnerability you dread may be the doorway to intimacy. The anger you suppress may be the force that protects your boundaries. The sadness you avoid may reconnect you to meaning. Each time you bring one piece of your shadow into the light, you reclaim a fragment of your soul. And slowly, what was once fragmented begins to weave back into a whole. You stop running from yourself. You stop splitting light from dark. You finally see, there was never a monster in the shadow, only the child you once were, waiting to be welcomed home. Every experience you have ever lived is recorded, not only in your mind, but in your nervous system, in your muscles, in the rhythm of your breath. The law of emotional memory teaches us that trauma is not simply what happened. It is what remains inside you long after the event has passed. A childhood filled with inconsistency, neglect, or conditional love may fade in conscious detail, but the emotions remain encoded. When someone turns away from you today, the ache in your chest is not only about the present moment, it is the echo of being left behind long ago. When someone criticizes you now, the sting is not just about their words, it is the reawakening of every moment you were told you were not enough. This is why small triggers feel enormous, why reactions seem disproportionate. You are not reacting only to now, you are reacting to then, replayed in your body. Think of your memory like a house with many rooms. Some doors remain wide open, clear recollections of birthdays, friendships, milestones. But the rooms that held pain were locked. You pushed the key under the rug and tried to forget, yet the air in the house still carries the scent of what happened. The nervous system never forgets. That is why you may find yourself unable to explain your feelings logically. Why does a delay in a text send you spiraling? Why does a partner's sigh feel like rejection? Why does silence make you restless as though you are in danger? Because the body remembers what the mind has tried to erase. Until you acknowledge these hidden rooms, you live inside a haunted house, unaware of what knocks at the door each night. Emotional memory is not stored in words. It lives in sensations. The quickened heartbeat when you fear abandonment. The tension in your jaw when you expect conflict. The pit in your stomach when someone says, "We need to talk." These reactions are automatic because they were learned before you had language to explain them. As a child, you felt the fear before you knew what abandonment meant. You felt the shame before you could define it. The law of emotional memory shows us that healing cannot happen only through rational thinking. You cannot talk yourself out of panic or logic your way out of loneliness. You must enter the body, listen to the signals, and bring presence where once there was only fear. This law explains why repeating cycles can feel impossible to escape. Imagine meeting someone new. At first, you feel safe, but the moment they become distant, your nervous system lights up with alarm. Not because of who they are, but because the emotional memory of distance once meant danger. You cling, you panic, you overthink, not out of choice, but out of conditioning. Or imagine pursuing a career. Every time you take a risk, the old memory of being told, "Don't fail," awakens. Suddenly, your creativity shuts down. You procrastinate, not because you are lazy, but because your body remembers the humiliation of making mistakes. Until these emotional memories are brought into awareness, they rule you like invisible gods, deciding your every move while you wonder why you feel trapped. The beauty of this law is that memory is not only about pain, it also holds joy. Beneath the trauma, your body remembers laughter, the sound of play, the taste of curiosity. Even if you cannot recall them clearly, the imprint of joy is still inside you, waiting to be reawakened. This is why certain songs make you cry without reason, why certain scents flood you with warmth, why a child's laughter feels strangely healing. The body is not only a record of wounds, it is also a library of forgotten delights. By returning to these moments, by allowing yourself to feel safe in joy again, you remind your nervous system that not all memory is threat. You begin to balance the scales. Healing through emotional memory means creating new imprints. Each time you allow yourself to rest without guilt, you are teaching your body, rest is safe now. Each time you speak your truth and survive, you teach your body, expression is not fatal. Each time you allow someone to love you and resist the urge to sabotage, you create a new emotional file, one that says, intimacy can feel safe. The old memories will not vanish, but they will no longer be the only voice. Slowly, the nervous system begins to recognize a new pattern, a new possibility. This is not just rewiring in theory, it is a lived experience, one breath at a time. The law of emotional memory reveals the heart of trauma recovery. You are not broken for feeling too much, for overreacting, for carrying pain long after it seemed to end. You are simply carrying the weight of echoes, and these echoes can be transformed when you allow yourself to meet them with presence rather than resistance. Imagine walking through the old house, this time with a lantern in your hand. You unlock the rooms one by one, not to relive the pain, but to air it out, to breathe, to reclaim space. What was once haunted becomes a home again. And slowly, you realize that the body you once veered is not your enemy, it is your oldest ally, guiding you back to the places where your child self still waits to be found. At the end of every path, beneath every layer of shadow, there comes a question: what if I was never broken? The law of wholeness is not about becoming flawless. It is about recognizing that even the cracks belong to the vase, that even the silence belongs to the song. For so long you have measured yourself against an illusion, a version of life where nothing is wounded, nothing is flawed, nothing hurts. But the truth is that your essence was never touched by pain. The wounds shaped how you walked, but they never erased who you were. Wholeness means returning to the center that was always intact, no matter how much dust covered it. Think of yourself as a tapestry. Threads of joy, fear, shame, resilience, laughter, and loss, all interwoven into one fabric. For years, you have been trained to see only the stains, to focus on the torn edges. You convinced yourself that because the tapestry is imperfect, it must be worthless. But the law of wholeness teaches us to step back, to see the entire weave. The scars are not interruptions, they are part of the design. The dark threads make the bright ones shine brighter. The places where you bent under weight are the very places where your strength is most visible. What you call damage is often the very evidence of your endurance. In practice, wholeness does not mean you will never be triggered again, never feel fear again, never fall into old patterns. It means that when these moments come, you will meet them with recognition rather than rejection. Instead of saying, "I am failing again," you will say, "This is an old echo, but I am more than this echo." That shift changes everything. Suddenly, the wound no longer defines you. It becomes a doorway. You are not trapped in it. You are standing at the threshold, with the power to step into a new room. Healing is not about removing the wound. It is about reclaiming the authority to walk beyond it. The law of wholeness also speaks to relationships. When you know you are whole, you stop seeking someone else to complete you. You no longer cling in desperation nor push away in fear. Instead, you choose from freedom. Love becomes a gift, not a rescue. Intimacy becomes a meeting of equals, not a patch for an emptiness inside. This does not mean you will never feel longing again, but it means longing will not be confused with lack. You can want closeness while knowing you are already complete. This is the paradox of wholeness. The more you remember you are enough on your own, the deeper your connections with others become. Even your perception of life itself begins to shift. When you saw yourself as broken, every challenge looked like a test you might fail. Every delay felt like a punishment. Every mistake felt like proof that you were unworthy. But when you step into wholeness, you begin to see life differently. A setback becomes a lesson, not a verdict. A loss becomes an invitation to rediscover strength you forgot you had. A mistake becomes a message, not a curse. In wholeness, the world itself feels less hostile, not because the world has changed, but because your inner lens has been cleansed of shame. The return to wholeness is not a single moment. It is a rhythm, a practice, a remembering. Each time you allow yourself to feel joy without suspicion, you are practicing wholeness. Each time you sit with your pain without labeling yourself as broken, you are practicing wholeness. Each time you forgive your younger self for surviving the only way they knew, you are practicing wholeness. And slowly, this practice becomes your nature again. You realize that you do not need to strive endlessly for some future arrival. You were already home. It was only hidden behind the noise of fear. And so we close this journey with a reminder that may echo long after the video ends. You are not on a path to fix yourself. You are not a puzzle missing pieces. You are not an empty shell waiting to be filled. You are whole, even here, even now. Every wound was a doorway, every scar a map, every shadow a guide. What you seek outside has always been the reflection of what already lived inside. You were never broken, only hidden. And now the hiding is over. If these words resonate, let them stay with you like a flame you carry into tomorrow. And if you wish to walk deeper into this journey, stay close. Subscribe, because your inner child will keep speaking, and together we will keep listening.